The desperate pleth sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the alien world. A peaceful silence hung in the air, but it was a silence that held danger. In the midst of this quiet, an alien princess stood alone, her shoulders slumped with the weight of her fears. Her heart raced as she stepped forward, eyes locked on the human in front of her. This was the moment that could change everything. The human was tall, his expression unreadable. His name was Captain John, a seasoned soldier who had seen countless battles. He had no idea what to expect from the princess standing before him. Her beauty was striking, but it was her desperation that caught his attention. She was different from anyone he had ever met. "Please," the princess began, her voice trembling. "I beg of you, help me." Captain John took a step closer, his brow furrowing. He had never heard such a plea, not from someone like her. She wasn't just any alien. She was royalty. Her people were known throughout the galaxy for their power and elegance. Yet here she was, standing in front of him as if she were an ordinary being asking for help. "What do you need, princess?" John asked, his tone softening just a little. The princess took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Her daughter's safety was at risk. Nothing else mattered. She had traveled through galaxies, crossed dangerous territories, all to find someone who could protect her child. And now, standing before this human, she had come to make an offer. "I will do anything," she said, her voice almost breaking. "Anything to keep my daughter safe." John looked at her, his eyes searching. Her face. He couldn't understand why she would be so desperate. What kind of danger could threaten someone as powerful as her? "Anything?" he asked, his curiosity growing. The princess nodded, wiping away a tear. "I will become your concubine. Just shelter my daughter. Give her a safe place to grow. That's all I ask." John blinked, his mind racing. A concubine. It was a shocking offer, but the sincerity in her eyes was undeniable. She wasn't asking for herself, she was asking for her daughter. And for a mother to offer herself in such a way meant that the danger she faced must be unimaginable. "Why would you offer this?" John asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "You're a princess. Your people are powerful. Why would you sacrifice so much for her?" The princess lowered her gaze, ashamed. "My people are powerful, yes, but they are also corrupt. I cannot trust them anymore. The enemy has already infiltrated my home and my daughter is their target. I have no other choice. Please help me." John's heart went out to her. He had seen pain before, but this was different. This was a mother's desperation, and it cut through him like a blade. He thought about his own mother and how far she would go to protect him. This alien princess, this stranger, was offering everything for her child. Could he turn his back on her? "You're willing to give up everything for her?" John asked, his voice low. "Yes," the princess replied, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "I would do anything. Please, just promise me you will keep her safe, no matter what happens to me." John took a deep breath, his mind weighing the decision. He didn't know what he was getting into, but he knew one thing: he couldn't turn away. Not now, not when she was asking so much. "All right," he said, finally making up his mind. "I'll protect her, both of you, but know this. I don't know what dangers we'll face. I don't know what will happen next, but I promise, I won't let anything happen to your daughter." The princess looked at him, a spark of hope flickering in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You are her only chance." With that, she stepped back, her hand resting on her stomach as she thought of her daughter. She was willing to give everything for her. And now, with this human's promise, she could finally have hope again. Captain John nodded, his expression serious. He had just made a choice that would change the course of both their lives. He couldn't help but wonder what else this strange alliance would bring. But for now his only concern was the princess's daughter and the future that was now in his hands. The princess turned and walked away, her mind already focused on the next step. She had placed her trust in a human, a man who had promised to protect her daughter. But could she trust him completely? The future was uncertain, and the danger was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope. The price of protection. Captain John sat at the edge of the table, his fingers tapping nervously against the smooth surface. The princess, whose name was Lyra, had left only moments ago, but the weight of her words still hung heavy in the air. Anything, she had said. Anything to protect her daughter. The human soldier, a battle-hardened man who had seen the worst of the universe, couldn't help but wonder what this truly meant. Lyra's offer had been nothing short of extraordinary. It had been an act of desperation, but something about it gnawed at him. A sense of unease he couldn't shake. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the vast expanse of alien terrain before him. A sprawling desert lay beneath the darkening sky, its twisted, jagged rocks casting strange shadows. The stillness of the scene only added to the tension in his chest. This wasn't a normal situation. He wasn't just helping a stranger. He was getting involved in something much bigger than he had expected. Just as he turned back to the room, a sharp knock on the door broke his thoughts. He walked over and opened it to find Lyra standing there, her face pale, her eyes filled with both determination and fear. She stepped inside without waiting for permission, her movements sharp, precise, like a queen stepping into a battlefield. "You've made your decision, Captain," she said, her voice steady but with an undertone of urgency. "But there's something you need to understand." John raised an eyebrow, his hand still resting on the doorframe. "What's that?" "The price of protection," Lyra whispered, looking over her shoulder as if afraid someone might be listening. "It's not just a matter of keeping her safe. This goes deeper than you realize, much deeper." John crossed his arms, feeling his unease grow. "You've got my attention, go on." Lyra's gaze softened for a moment before hardening again. She stepped closer to him, her voice low. "My daughter, Arya, is the heir to an empire. A powerful empire. One that controls not just planets but entire sectors of space. Her bloodline is ancient, filled with rulers who have shaped the destiny of countless worlds. And that's exactly why she's in danger." John's mind raced. He had heard whispers of powerful alien empires, but he never thought they'd be anything like this. But why would they target her? She's just a child. Lyra clenched her fists. Because she's a symbol of everything they want to control. The enemies who have infiltrated my people are not just after her. They want the power she represents. They want to destroy everything she stands for. John's jaw tightened. "And you're willing to give up everything for her? Become my concubine?" "As you said?" Lyra nodded without hesitation. "If it means she can live, I will do anything. I've seen the horrors they've done to my people, the betrayal, the bloodshed. I can't let it happen to her. She's the last hope for peace in our galaxy. If she dies, everything dies with her." John stared at her for a long time, weighing her words. There was a fire in her eyes, an intensity that made him realize how far she was willing to go. This wasn't just about survival. It was about an empire's future. Lyra's daughter wasn't just any child. She was a beacon of hope. And if John failed to protect her, the galaxy could plunge into chaos. "What happens if I fail?" John asked, his voice a whisper barely audible. Lyra's face darkened. "If you fail, we all fail. My daughter will die and the enemies will rise. They will have control over everything. We will be powerless. And the universe will be plunged into an age of darkness." John felt a shiver run down his spine. This wasn't just a simple mission. This wasn't just about a single life. This was about the fate of an entire galaxy, and possibly the future of every living being in it. The pressure was immense, but he had already made a promise, and he wasn't about to break it. "So, what's the next step?" he asked, feeling the weight of his decision settling on him. Lyra's lips parted in a small smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "We leave tonight," she said, her voice steady now. "I have a safe house. It's hidden, well protected. We'll be safe there, at least for a while." "And after that?" John asked. his mind spinning with questions. What happens next? We wait, she replied simply. We wait and hope that my enemies don't find us. And if they do, well, we fight. We fight for my daughter, for the future of my people. As Lyra turned to leave, John's gaze followed her, his mind still reeling from the gravity of the situation. What had he gotten himself into? And what would happen if he couldn't protect her? He didn't have all the answers yet. But one thing was clear. The battle they were about to face would change everything. Unlikely allies, the night had fallen over the alien landscape, a blanket of stars twinkling above like scattered diamonds. The air was thick with tension as Captain John and Princess Lyra stood at the edge of a hidden safe house, overlooking a valley of twisted, jagged rocks. The wind whispered softly through the broken terrain as if carrying secrets from a forgotten time. They were safe, for now. But John couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. He glanced at Lyra, who stood beside him, her posture stiff and regal despite the circumstances. Her eyes were dark, haunted by the weight of the promise she had made. She had put her faith in him, but how far could that trust really go? How could he, a soldier from a distant world, protect someone as powerful and important as her daughter? This is the first time I've had a real sense of peace in days, Lyra said softly, breaking the silence. Her voice was distant, as if she were talking to herself rather than John. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. And now? Now, she said, her voice filled with resolve. We wait. We wait for the enemy to make their move. And we prepare. John frowned. You said the safe house was hidden. You said we would be safe here, but what if they find us anyway? Lyra's eyes met his, a flicker of something. Anger, fear, or perhaps both, passing through her gaze. They will find us eventually. My enemies are relentless. They'll stop at nothing to get what they want, but they won't take us without a fight. So what do we do? John asked, his voice steady but his mind racing. His entire life had been about combat. But this was different. This wasn't a battle against an invading army. This was something far more personal, far more dangerous. Lyra turned to face him, her expression hardening. We fight back. We have to. We can't let them win. The words hung in the air, charged with an intensity that made John's chest tighten. He had known he'd be putting himself in danger, but this wasn't just about his life anymore. This was about protecting the future, protecting a child. And if he failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. We need allies, John said suddenly, the thought coming to him in a flash. We can't do this alone. Lyra gave a slight nod. You're right. But my people... She trailed off, the sadness in her voice thick. They are fractured. Some are loyal to me, but most, they are too afraid of the power that's risen against us. So, who can we trust? John pressed. There's one person, Lyra said after a moment of hesitation. Someone who can help us. He's a former general of my army. His name is Zarek. He fought beside me when I was younger, and though he's no longer in my service, he owes me his loyalty. But... She paused, her gaze distant. He won't help unless he sees the urgency. He has his own reasons for staying out of the conflict. John raised an eyebrow. So we have to convince him? Yes, Lyra answered, and it won't be easy. Zarek is a man of principle. If we approach him wrongly, he might turn us away. Then we approach him right, John said with determination. We'll show him that this is bigger than personal allegiances, that we're not just fighting for one life, but for the future of the galaxy. Lyra stared at him for a long moment, a strange expression crossing her face. You're not like other soldiers I've met, she said quietly. John looked at her, his lips pressing into a thin line. Maybe that's a good thing. They set off toward Zarek's hideout at dawn, their journey taking them through rugged terrain, treacherous paths that no one had traveled in years. Lyra moved with the grace and poise of someone who had been born into power, but there was an undeniable sadness in her eyes that John couldn't ignore. Every step she took was burdened with the knowledge that her enemies were out there, hunting her daughter, ready to tear everything she had ever known apart. As they neared the hideout, John couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking straight into a trap. Zarek had been out of the game for years, but old alliances ran deep. They could never be sure of anyone, not even those who claimed loyalty to Lyra. They approached the old stone building, its dark silhouette cutting against the pale sky. The air was thick with tension as John reached for the blaster at his side, his senses on high alert. But before he could take another step, the door creaked open, revealing a tall, weathered man standing in the doorway. "Zarek, I was wondering when you'd show up," Zarek said, his voice gruff but not unfriendly. His eyes flickered over John before locking onto Lyra. "So the princess has come to beg for help. I thought you'd be smarter than this." Lyra's face hardened. "You know why I'm here, Zarek. I don't have time for games." Zarek's expression softened slightly, but he didn't move from the door. "Come inside, we'll talk." As they stepped inside, John couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. They were walking into unknown territory, surrounded by uncertainty, but he had made his choice and he wasn't going to back down now. Zarek didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I know why you're here," he said, sitting down at a worn table and motioning for them to do the same. "But let me be clear. Princess, you want my help, you need to prove that this is worth the fight." Lyra's eyes flashed with determination. "You don't think the fate of my daughter is enough to convince you?" Zarek's gaze hardened. "It's not just about one child. It's about power. It's about who gets to control this galaxy. If we fail, it's not just your daughter that dies. Everything dies. And that, princess, is what I'm afraid of." The conversation was just beginning, but John could feel the tension in the air. Zarek might be an ally, but trust would have to be earned. And with the enemies closing in, time was something they didn't have much of. A threat from the past, the safe house, though secure for now, felt more like a cage with every passing hour. Captain John stood by the window, his gaze focused on the endless stretch of barren land outside. The horizon blurred in the distance as though the desert itself was conspiring to swallow them whole. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with uncertainty. Lyra paced, her mind racing with thoughts of her daughter Arya and the enemies hunting them. "We've stayed here long enough," Lyra said abruptly, her voice cutting through the silence. Her eyes flashed with the same fire that had burned since she first made her desperate bargain. "We can't wait any longer, they're coming." John turned to face her, the tension in her words sinking into his gut. "We've only just made contact. With Zarek," he reminded her. "You can't rush into a fight we're not ready for." "You don't understand," Lyra said, her voice low but edged with raw emotion. "This isn't just about surviving. They know we're here. I can feel them closing in, watching us." "How do you know?" John asked, his tone cautious. "We've taken every precaution." Lyra's face hardened, her expression more distant than John had ever seen it. "The enemies I face, they don't play by the rules. They have spies everywhere. They're far more dangerous than you think." She paused, her hands trembling slightly. "And now they've sent someone, a shadow from my past." John's pulse quickened. "Who?" Lyra turned, her eyes locking with his. "His name is Tormak. He was once my closest ally, a general in my army. We fought side by side, and together we led my people through some of our darkest days. But he betrayed me." He turned, his back on everything we believed in. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. John didn't need to ask why Tormak was so dangerous. Betrayal ran deep in any conflict, and someone as close to Lyra as Tormak would know her weaknesses better than anyone. "So, he's hunting us?" John asked, his voice steady despite the rising tension in his chest. "He's leading the enemy forces," Lyra replied. "And he's not the kind of man who forgets old debts. He will stop at nothing to see me destroyed. And if he knows we're here?" Her voice trailed off, the implications too dark to speak aloud. Just as John was about to speak, a loud knock echoed through the door, sharp and unsettling. Both of them froze, their gazes locked. Lyra's face drained of color as she turned to John. "It's him," she whispered. John moved instinctively, stepping in front of her as he reached for his weapon. "Stay back," he said, his voice low. "Let me handle this." But Lyra shook her head. "He won't come here alone," she warned. "He never travels without an army." The door creaked open slowly, revealing Zarek standing in the doorway, his expression grim. Behind him, the shadows of several armed soldiers loomed. "Captain," Zarek said, his voice low and serious, "we have a problem." "What's going on?" John demanded, his hand resting on the blaster at his side. Zarek didn't waste time with formalities. "Tormak's forces are moving. They've tracked us here. We don't have much time. They'll be at this location within hours." Lyra's face went pale, but she held herself with an icy resolve. "I knew it," she muttered. "He's come for me." John turned to Zarek. "How do we stop them?" Zarek's eyes flickered with a mix of grim determination and regret. "We don't stop them. Not here. Not now. Our only chance is to get to the high ground. It's an old fortress, but it's heavily fortified. We can hold them off there. But we'll need to move fast." Lyra nodded, her eyes cold. "Let's go," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. "This ends today." The team moved quickly, the tension growing as they made their way through the narrow corridors of the hideout, gathering weapons and supplies. John couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was already upon them. The enemy was closing in, and the battle they were about to face would not be one they could escape unscathed. As they made their way out of the safe house, John glanced at Lyra, who was moving with purpose, her mind already on the next move. She wasn't just fighting for her life. She was fighting for her daughter. And that made her dangerous, more dangerous than anyone else he had ever encountered. They didn't speak as they trekked through the desert, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting an eerie glow across the land. John's mind raced with questions. How did Tormak find them? How far would he go to destroy everything Lyra had fought for? And what would happen when they finally confronted him? As they neared the fortress, the sound of distant gunfire echoed in the air, sending a chill down John's spine. They were close. Too close. "We're almost there," Zarek said, his voice low but his steps never faltering. The ground beneath them rumbled as a massive explosion rang out in the distance. The enemy was already on the move. John's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. The moment they had been preparing for had arrived. They were no longer hiding from the past. They were facing it head on, and they would fight for their lives, and for the future. The rising stakes, the night air was thick with anticipation. The towering fortress loomed ahead, its jagged walls cutting against the dark sky like the bones of an ancient beast. Captain John's pulse quickened as he adjusted his grip on his weapon, his mind racing. The explosion from earlier had left a cloud of dust swirling around them, the sound still ringing in his ears. Their pursuers were closing in. Tormak's forces were relentless, and every minute spent in this desolate landscape brought them closer to an inevitable clash. "We're almost there," Zarek said quietly, his voice laced with determination. His eyes were scanning the horizon, his body tensed, ready for the next move. John nodded but couldn't shake the knot forming in his stomach. Everything had changed in the past 24 hours. What had started as a simple mission to protect a child was quickly becoming a fight for survival on an unimaginable scale. The fortress, though formidable, was their last hope. They had to make it inside. There was no turning back. As they approached the outer gates of the fortress, John turned to Lyra, who was walking beside him. Her face was a mask of resolve, but the faintest trace of worry lingered in her eyes. For a brief moment, he saw a flicker of the princess she had once been, a ruler who had once held the fate of empires in her hands. "How do we hold them off?" John asked, his voice low as they approached the iron doors of the fortress. Lyra glanced at him, her lips tightening. "We don't hold them off, Captain," she replied, her voice steady. "We survive, and we fight. Because if we don't, it's all over. The gates creaked open and they slipped inside, the fortress walls enclosing them in a temporary sanctuary. John couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in on them, suffocating them with the weight of their past decisions. They had no time to regroup, no time for plans. The fight had already begun. "The enemies will be here within an hour," Zarek said, his voice grim. "We need to fortify the perimeter and make sure we're ready for the worst." As they moved deeper into the fortress, John's mind raced. What if they weren't ready? What if they couldn't hold them off? The shadows of the past were closing in. Tormak and his forces had already proven themselves to be more formidable than anything they had faced before. But it wasn't just the soldiers John was worried about. It was Lyra. He could see the strain in her eyes as she led them deeper into the fortress. This was her fight, not his. And yet here he was, tied to her cause in a way he hadn't anticipated. They gathered in a large chamber at the center of the fortress, its stone walls thick and impenetrable. Zarek immediately began organizing the group, assigning positions and preparing weapons. But John couldn't stop staring at Lyra. She stood near the window, looking out at the approaching army, her thoughts far away. She was alone in this. She always had been. "You're thinking about Arya, aren't you?" John said, his voice cutting through the silence. Lyra didn't turn to face him, but her shoulders stiffened. "Of course. She's my everything." John took a step closer. "I know it's hard, but you don't have to do this alone." "I never have," Lyra replied quietly. "But it's not about me anymore, it's about my daughter. She is the future. If we fail, everything fails." A long pause hung between them. John wanted to say something comforting, but there was nothing that could erase the weight of the burden she carried. Nothing that could erase the fact that they were about to face an enemy that would stop at nothing to destroy them. "They're here." Zarek's voice snapped them out of their thoughts. He had been watching through a small opening in the wall. "They've breached the outer defenses. We need to move now." John's heart pounded in his chest as they quickly moved to their positions. The sound of distant footsteps echoed in the stone halls, growing louder with each passing second. The enemy was on their heels and they had no time to waste. As they prepared for the oncoming battle, John could see the resolve in Lyra's eyes. No matter how tired, how broken, how hopeless things seemed, she would never back down. This was her fight, and she would see it through to the end. He knew that now. But what did it mean for him? What did it mean for everyone else in the fortress? A sudden explosion rocked the ground and the walls of the fortress trembled. Dust and debris filled the air as the blast echoed in their ears. The enemy had arrived. "Get ready," Zarek barked. "They're coming in full force." The first wave of enemy soldiers burst through the entrance, their weapons drawn and ready for combat. They were fast, organized, and relentless. John barely had time to react as they stormed into the fortress, taking cover behind pillars and walls. Gunfire filled the air, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. He fired back instinctively, his body moving on pure adrenaline. But in the chaos, John's eyes kept drifting to Lyra. She was at the center of it all, her eyes locked on the battlefield, her face a mask of determination. He couldn't help but admire her strength. She had been a leader, a warrior, long before he had come into her life. But now, she was something more. She was a mother, fighting for the survival of her daughter and the future of her people. The battle raged on, the enemy pushing forward with each passing minute. John and Zarek fought side by side, but the weight of the situation pressed down on them. Every shot fired, every life lost, brought them closer to a fate none of them were ready for. And yet, there was no turning back now. The stakes were higher, than ever. If they lost here, they lost everything. In the midst of the chaos, a figure emerged from the shadows, a silhouette against the firelight. John's heart skipped a beat. It was Tormak. He had arrived. And he wasn't alone. Secrets revealed. The air inside the fortress grew thick with tension. Dust swirled through the dim corridors as gunfire echoed from the outer chambers. John's heart pounded in his chest. His every sense heightened as he moved through the narrow halls, weapons at the ready. His mind raced, still processing the chaos of the battle. The enemy had pushed hard, but they had managed to hold their ground for now. He found Lyra near the back of the fortress, her face pale but composed as she scanned the battlefield outside. Her once pristine armor was scuffed and worn, the symbols of her royal bloodline barely visible beneath the dirt and grime. She had been fighting relentlessly, but there was something else in her eyes now, a flicker of unease, a crack in her unyielding resolve. "Lyra," John called softly, approaching her cautiously. She turned to him, her face softening for a moment. "Captain," she said, her voice low, "it's happening faster than I anticipated. They're stronger than I thought. This battle, it's not just about survival anymore. It's about something much bigger." John raised an eyebrow, his grip tightening on his blaster. "What are you talking about?" Lyra's gaze flickered to the window, her mind clearly elsewhere. "The war we're fighting, the one you've been dragged into, it's more than a simple fight for survival. It's the struggle for control over a galaxy on the brink of collapse." John frowned, confused. "I don't understand." "Never wanted this," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I never wanted to bring you into this fight, but you deserve to know the truth." She turned away, walking a few steps toward the center of the room, her eyes distant. John hesitated, unsure of what was happening. He'd known there was more to her story, but this felt like the beginning of something much deeper than he could have imagined. "When you ask me why I'm fighting so hard for my daughter," Lyra continued, her back to him, "you wanted to know what was at stake. What I didn't tell you, what I couldn't tell you is that my daughter, Arya, she's not just a symbol of hope for our people. She's the key to a power so ancient, so dangerous, that it could either save or destroy everything." John stepped forward, his confusion deepening. "What power? What are you talking about?" Lyra turned to face him, her eyes dark with a mix of fear and regret. "The power of the first bloodline, the ancient rulers of my people, my ancestors, didn't just rule with strength. They ruled with the ability to manipulate the very fabric of the universe itself. The power to control life, death, space, and time." John's breath caught in his throat. "Wait, are you saying your daughter has this power?" "Not just her," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. "It's passed down through the royal bloodline, yes, but Arya has something more, something that no one in the galaxy has ever seen before, something that could change everything." John felt his pulse quicken. This was bigger than he had imagined. It wasn't just about protecting a child. It was about controlling the very fate of the universe itself. "And Tormak?" John asked, his mind piecing things together. "He knows about this power?" Lyra nodded slowly. "He's not just after me. He's after Arya. Because whoever controls her bloodline controls everything. He's willing to do anything to seize that power. And he's already manipulated entire armies to do his bidding. So if we don't stop him, we lose everything," Lyra finished for him, her voice hollow. "The universe will fall into darkness. My people, my daughter's people, they will all be enslaved under Tormak's rule. And this galaxy, it will cease to exist in its current form. Will be nothing but shadows lost to time." John's mind spun with the enormity of it all. He had thought he was just fighting to protect a child, but now he understood the true weight of his involvement. This wasn't just a battle of survival. It was a fight for the soul of the galaxy. "But why didn't you tell me this earlier?" John asked, his voice strained. Lyra's eyes filled with sorrow. "Because it's dangerous. The fewer people who know, the better. I never wanted anyone to get caught up in this war, especially you." "Especially me." John's voice was sharp with disbelief. "I'm already in this, Lyra. Whether you want me here or not, I can't just walk away." She closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering herself. "I didn't want you to be dragged into this fight. You're a soldier, John. And I knew that once you understood the truth, you would never be able to walk away. But the truth is, this is bigger than any of us. We can't fight this alone. We need to stand together." There was a long pause. John looked at her, his mind racing. "So what do we do now?" Lyra met his gaze, her expression hardening once more. "Now we fight. Now we take the fight to Tormak. because if we don't, everything will be lost. Suddenly the walls of the fortress trembled again, and a low rumble filled the air. It wasn't just distant explosions anymore, it was the sound of their enemy advancing. "They're here." Zarek's voice came through the door, urgent. "They've broken through the outer defenses." Lyra's face became a mask of determination. "It's time." John's heart raced. The stakes had never been higher. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a battle for the future itself. And now, with the weight of the truth bearing down on him, John knew there was no turning back. "Let's go," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos that was unfolding outside. "It's time to end this." They rushed to the front lines, the air crackling with the energy of an impending storm. The final battle had begun, and the fate of the universe rested in their hands. The ultimate sacrifice, the fortress trembled with every explosion that rocked its foundations. Dust and debris filled the air, the sound of distant gunfire mixing with the heavy thrum of their own heartbeat. John's hand gripped the blaster tighter, his eyes scanning the chaos unfolding outside the fortress walls. He could feel the weight of every decision pressing on him. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was the final stand. They had fought tooth and nail to get here, to this point where everything would either fall into place or be torn apart. The walls had been breached. The enemy, led by Tormak, was closing in. They had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and every second brought them closer to a fate they could not escape. Lyra stood beside him, her face set in stone, eyes narrowed with determination. The princess who had once been a ruler, feared and adored, was now a warrior, a mother fighting for her child's future. Her armor, now cracked and scorched, spoke of countless battles fought, of a past too painful to forget. But today was different. Today they would make their last stand. "Are you ready?" John asked her, his voice steady, though his heart pounded in his chest. Lyra nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't have a choice, Captain. We're all in this now." They had learned something crucial in the past hours. This wasn't just about fighting for survival. This was about breaking the chains of tyranny that Tormak sought to impose on the galaxy. He wasn't just a general or a leader. Tormak had an ancient power too, one that could rival the one hidden within Aria's bloodline. This battle wasn't only about saving her. It was about stopping an era of darkness from consuming everything. John took a deep breath. "Then let's make sure we don't fail." The doors to the command room slammed open and Zarek entered, his face grim but resolute. His soldiers followed, weapons ready, all of them aware that they were facing the last battle of their lives. "The enemy is almost here," Zarek said, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "We can't hold out much longer." "We don't need to hold out," Lyra replied, her voice like steel. "We need to fight. We need to give everything to make sure this stops now." Zarek nodded, acknowledging her unyielding determination. "Then let's make it count." Outside, the battlefield was alive with chaos. The roar of engines filled the air as enemy ships descended, their dark silhouettes against the smoke and fire. Tormak's forces had arrived, and they were not here to negotiate. They were here to destroy. John turned to Lyra, his gaze steady. "We can't hold this position forever. What's the plan?" She looked at him, her expression a mixture of sadness and resolve. "We need to take down their command center. Tormak's forces won't stop until we're all dead. If we strike hard enough, we can break their coordination. We can end this." John's heart raced. It was a bold plan, one that carried immense risk. But what choice did they have? He glanced over at Zarek, who had already begun organizing the soldiers. "How do we get there?" he asked, knowing that every second was precious. "Through the old tunnels beneath the fortress," Zarek answered. "They're still intact. If we move quickly, we can get to Tormak before he realizes what's happening." The plan was set. There was no turning back now. John and Lyra, along with Zarek and a handful of soldiers, would make their way to the heart of the enemy forces. It would be a one-way trip. But it was the only chance they had to end this war, to stop Tormak's reign of terror once and for all. They moved swiftly through the tunnels, the air damp and stale. Every step was a reminder of what they were fighting for. Not just survival, but the future of the galaxy itself. John's mind raced with questions. Would they make it in time? Would they be able to stop Tormak? Or would they fail and watch everything they had fought for crumble to dust? The sound of distant explosions and gunfire echoed in the tunnels as they emerged into the heart of the enemy's camp. Tormak's soldiers were everywhere, marching with ruthless efficiency. John's stomach churned. They were so close to the end, and yet, so far from victory. They crept through the shadows, moving closer to the command center. John could hear the voices of Tormak's officers, their discussions filled with arrogance and cruelty. The air around them was thick with the weight of impending doom. Time was running out. "We're close," Zarek whispered, signaling for everyone to stop. "This is it." Lyra's eyes met John's, and for a brief moment, the weight of their journey hung between them. She had already given everything for her daughter, for her people. Now she was willing to give even more. "You don't have to do this," John said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I do," Lyra replied, her voice steady. "This is my fight, and if I have to give my life to stop Tormak, I will." It was then that John realized the true depth of Lyra's sacrifice. It wasn't just about fighting for her daughter's future. It was about giving everything to ensure that the galaxy would have a chance at a future at all. They moved quickly now, cutting through the enemy lines with precision. The command center loomed ahead, a fortress of its own. As they approached, John's heart beat in his chest like a drum. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. As they reached the entrance, Tormak's voice rang out, cold and menacing. "So you've come to face me, Princess? How predictable." The doors exploded open, and there, standing in the center of the room, was Tormak. His dark eyes filled with malice, his posture commanding. He was no longer just a general. He had become something darker, something more dangerous. "This ends now," Lyra said, her voice full of determination. Tormak's lips curled into a cruel smile. "So it does." And in that moment, as the battle erupted around them, Lyra made her choice. She stepped forward, her voice clear and resolute. "For the future of the galaxy. For my daughter." John's eyes widened as he saw what she was about to do. She wasn't just fighting for victory. She was preparing for the ultimate sacrifice. With a final defiant cry, Lyra launched herself into the fray, her energy resonating with the ancient power that had once been her birthright. And in that moment, John realized what she had always known. Sometimes, the